Welcome back. All right, so I don't think I've done a panic index in the off season before, so we're going to do this, but it's going to be different. This is not just like a panic index for what's gone on in the off season because I don't think there's a lot of panic. Most people are just watching the Olympics right now. So that being said, I do want to measure panic where panic's at the top of the board, and I'm going to measure it by which fan base slash media would be most panicked if a team gets off to a slow start. So if a team starts 1-5, if a team starts 3-8, which fan base slash media, because it's a little bit of both. When I do the panic index, it's not just, oh, fans are freaking out. It can be media as well. And what I've done is I've organized this from the original six, so the original six here, and then all the way over to the most recent additions to the league, which ends with Utah, because technically Utah does not get Arizona's history, nor the Winnipeg Jets' original history. That's sort of lost in the void right now, so we'll see what happens. But yeah, I'm not talking about the void from the Deadpool movie, although that's pretty fantastic too. Did review that the other day. So, anyways, I'm not wearing my Deadpool jersey, but I wore that to the movie when I saw it because why you have a Deadpool jersey? All right, so we'll start with the Rangers. So we'll go in order of the logos on the board. The Rangers, I think there will be some panic if they have a slow start. I don't think it'll be top level like, oh my gosh, everything's falling apart. There will be some concern too if Shesterkin hasn't got his extension in place and if the Rangers start slow. Would there then be rumors of, hey, maybe Igor doesn't sign here? Maybe he wants to go somewhere else? Well, of course. Media and fans are going to do that. And with the media now being more click based than fact based, it definitely muddies the waters a little bit. And it's not that case with all media, but it's that case with enough of the media that I'm kind of tired of clicking on articles on the internet. We'll put it that way. I get tired of the articles you click on, and then you got to scroll through 8 or 9 paragraphs and pass like 3 or 4 ads to actually get to the point. But anyways, that being said, Rangers end up there. Boston, I'm gonna put them next to Kevin there. Uh, I have very little patience for stupidity. Boston fans, I think if they get off to a slow start, I think they'll be rational about it. I don't think they'll necessarily panic. They won't be happy about it. But I think most Boston fans understand that the best chance to win the Stanley Cup may very well have been 2019. And this team now not probably in that top contender spot, which is okay. It's not the end of the world. Speaking of which, for Toronto, yeah, they've always got a hair trigger. Toronto Maple Leafs, whether it's fans or media, there is that hair trigger there. And I'm not saying all. It's definitely not all. But when you've got Toronto and the size of the fan base and the size of the media, it's going to be enough that yeah they end up it looks like a total panic, right? The Toronto Maple Leafs are dealing with year 9 now of the Austin Matthews era, and I get the feeling patience is wearing pretty thin, especially if they don't actually make any significant changes up front. It doesn't look like they're going to. Yeah, they'll be under the microscope. Montreal, I get the feeling they're not in the position where there's no pressure, but it's not very high. I think the expectation is Montreal should get better. If Montreal shows signs of regression or finishing at the bottom of the league kind of regression, I think there will be some panic. So if they start 1-5 or 3-8, there will be those in the Montreal sphere that might say maybe St. Louis is not the right coach. There'd be questions asked, but I think enough people understand the team's going through the rebuild that I don't think there'll be straight out panic. Chicago goes right next to this. There's no pressure in Chicago. There's none. The Chicago Blackhawks, they can get off to a start the same as last year, and I don't think there'll be any panic. I think people understand what's going on in Chicago, and it feels like we're in a different era. There was a time where a team would be this bad for multiple years on end, and fans didn't care who was getting drafted. None. It was just, this team is terrible, fix it. Detroit, there will definitely be some pressure on Detroit. I'm not going to put them at the top of the board because if Detroit gets off to a 3-8 start, I think there'd be annoyance as much as panic. There'd be a lot of see, the Iser plan doesn't work. A lot of eye rolling, a lot of here we go again. But I don't consider Detroit to be at the absolute top of the board. Dallas. There's pressure in Dallas. There's enough pressure in Dallas that would I put them at the top of the board becomes the question. I'm kind of leaning towards Rangers and Detroit level. So I'm not going to say total panic, but there would definitely be some panic if the Dallas Stars get off to a rough start. because this is a good young team. They shouldn't be getting off to a rough start. Shouldn't happen. The LA Kings, there's pressure in LA. With the moves that Rob Blake has made, if that team gets off to a slow start and they don't look like a playoff team early, I would expect the calls for Rob Blake's job to get really loud really fast. Both on the media side and the fan side. And I'm not going to weigh in on whether or not I think that's fair, because I totally understand a fan base saying that's it. I've done that with Vancouver. I've done that with Boston. During O'Connell's era in Boston, I was exactly the same kind of sentiment as we see from some Boston fans now with Don Sweeney. So I get it, and I think if LA gets off to a slow start, there'll be some discussion about that. Pittsburgh's hard to rate. So missing the playoffs in back-to-back years should drop the expectation. But since management's not willing to do any kind of actual rebuild and keeping things kind of the same as probably whereabouts they're going to be, I'm going to put them next to Boston. I don't think fan expectations in Pittsburgh are significantly higher than elsewhere, and I'm fine with putting them at that stage. I think that's right about halfway between not panicked at all and panicked, right? Philadelphia, there's no pressure in Philadelphia. There just isn't. I think the understanding is that the Philadelphia Flyers are in this rebuild now, and so however ugly it's going to get, it's going to get. The hope is that the future is a lot brighter. I don't see any reason why it won't be brighter, so fingers crossed on that one, but there's no pressure in Philly. St. Louis, I don't think there's any pressure in St. Louis. I wouldn't even put it at this level. I think people in St. Louis understand, and I think the media and the fans understand that this team, coming off of a playoff miss this year, they could very well miss the playoffs again. I don't think it's going to be the end of the world. There would be questions asked then about what the right moves would be going forward, but I don't think it would come from an area of panic. I think it would just be, okay, this team isn't quite good enough. Who do we move? Who do we keep? How do we fix this? And then the questions would get asked of whether it's going to be a long-term rebuild or not. Buffalo can't afford another slow start. Buffalo cannot afford to be slow out of the gate. If Buffalo is off to a really bad start, I would expect some very angry Sabres fans. And rightfully so. Again, I would have no problem with Sabres fans being angry, because it took a long time before attendance dropped to the level that it's been at Buffalo for the last little while. Fans were filling that building for some pretty bad teams, and eventually fans get tired of it. So I think with Buffalo, I think there's pressure on them to start well and make the playoffs. Make the playoffs. Vancouver's going at the top too. Yep, they come in together as expansion brethren. I would think that Vancouver fans, if Vancouver gets off to like a 1-5 or 2-6 start, there's going to be some panic in Vancouver. Absolutely. And there would be definitely calls from fans everywhere else saying, see, they're flash in the pan. They had one really good year. They won their division. And today I got a hat which says division winners and a t-shirt which says division winners. So I've got that for the Canucks out of the way, because I don't know when they're going to do it again. I've still got gear from back in the 90s whenever they'd win the division, and from the early 2010s. So, getting division winner stuff is important, because I don't know if they're going to do it again, but I would expect that Canuck fans will jump on that if it doesn't work. Calgary, there's no panic in Calgary. I think Flames fans understand what's going on there. I think, honestly, there might be more panic if they do really well out of the gate. Like, no, we need top draft picks. We need prospects. If Calgary were to get the number one draft pick in next year's draft, that would go a long way. So I think for Calgary, they may be one of the few teams in the league that's really going into the tank. Other teams are trying to pull themselves out of it. Chicago, Philly, San Jose, I think, are doing their best to try to stay away from being last overall necessarily, but Calgary may end up down there. It's possible, and I don't think there's any panic there. The Islanders, I'm going to put them next to Boston and Pittsburgh. I think Islander fans are pretty smart fans and understand that this team probably not a contender this coming season. With Patrick Roy behind the bench, there's a good chance they're going to improve, but there's not really a reason to panic necessarily if things don't go all that well. I don't think anybody's going to call for Lamoriello's job right away, other than people who are calling for it already. So, yeah, I don't see any reason to panic with the Islanders. New Jersey. I'm not going to put them at the top level, but I'm not going to put them at this level either, because New Jersey, there's pressure on them. They fixed the goaltending and they fixed the defense. Good. If they get off to a slow start, again, 2-6, 3-8, somewhere in that region, Devils fans are going to have some questions. They're not going to be very happy. And so for the New Jersey Devils, the expectation is they get back to the playoffs. I expect them to be back in the playoffs. We'll see whether or not that happens. But New Jersey, I'm putting up near the top. The Capitals are a tough one for me to figure out. So I'm going to chicken out and put them in the middle, because I think they're hoping for playoffs. The moves made by the team in the offseason thus far seem to indicate the team wants to make the playoffs, and that's the expectation from Capitals management. However, I think Capitals fans too know that they're not necessarily a contender, like a top contender at this point. So if the Capitals get off to a slow start, I don't think there's going to be panic at these two levels here. But I don't think it's just going to be casual, well, these things happen either. The Oilers. The Oilers got off to a slow start last season, and they survived. I'm going to go out on a limb and say if the Oilers have a slow start, that Oiler fans will say it'll be fine. We had a slow start last season. We were just fine. We went all the way to the Stanley Cup final. I don't think we're going to see a panic in Edmonton if there's a slow start. I don't think we'll see a coaching change this time, though, either. But the expectation would be the Oilers will pull themselves out of it. They're in a weaker division, yada, yada, yada. So I don't think we'll see the Edmonton Oilers necessarily as a team, or fans and media that would panic if things don't start out really, really well for the Oilers. Colorado. There's so many unknowns with Colorado. So if Colorado gets off to a slow start, do Avs fans say, well, we don't have Nichushkin because of the suspension? Do they say, well, Landeskog's not back yet in the event he's not, and say, all right, well, once we get Nichushkin back and Landeskog back, we'll be fine? Or do they say, you know what, this team isn't getting better, it's getting worse? I'm going to put him here. I'm going to put him there, because there's no guarantee that if/when Nichushkin's back in their lineup, if/when Landeskog's back in their lineup, you can't guarantee it turns right on. So I'm not going to put them at the top, but I'm not going to put them in the middle either. Carolina, I'm going to put them at the top. Why? Because they have definitely lost some players in the offseason, and this is a team that was supposed to be a cup contender this past season that couldn't get out of the second round, and I think patience is going to start wearing thin in Carolina, and if this team gets off to a slow start, we'll probably have some conversations from the fans about it, is my guess. So yeah, Carolina ends up there. San Jose, no pressure in San Jose. There just isn't any. I could try to manufacture some reason why there might be panic, but there isn't. The only thing that would panic them is if Celebrini doesn't fit in, he's not doing well as a rookie. But even then, do you panic about a teenager not being able to play in the NHL all that well? You shouldn't. I know there's fans that do, but you really, really shouldn't. Sorry, had to pause. I was going to sneeze. All right. So San Jose ends up at the bottom of the board. I'll agree on that. Fine. Ottawa, there's some pressure in Ottawa. I don't put him at the top. You know what? I should, because if after acquiring Ullmark, if Ullmark has a rough start and Ottawa has a rough start, one thing I would say is when Ullmark got to Boston, it took a little while for him to get accustomed to Boston. He had a rough preseason, and there was definitely concern with Boston fans about the contract then, but he did adjust and obviously got a lot better. I wouldn't be surprised if Ullmark has just a bit of a learning curve in Ottawa, or if fans in Ottawa get kind of tired of that learning curve and say, you know what, we'd like to have some playoffs this year, please. Tampa Bay. If Tampa Bay gets off to a slow start, I'm going to put them here. I think we'll see articles pretty quickly about how losing Stamkos has hurt this team's winning pedigree. They're without a leader. They're rudderless. We'll see that. And if they win, everybody will say, you know what, they're fine. Gensel's been great. All this fun stuff. But if things go sour for Tampa Bay early, I would expect the narrative to become, see, they lost their main guy there and they're in trouble. Florida, I honestly, they won the Stanley Cup. How much panic are you going to have with Florida? So later on in the summer, I'll do a power rankings on who I think has the most pressure to win the Stanley Cup this year, which will not look exactly like this, but it'll be similar, right? Florida, I don't think anybody's going to panic if Florida gets off to a slow start. We do regularly see the Stanley Cup hangover is a thing. It does happen. Doesn't happen to every Stanley Cup champion or Stanley Cup runner-up, but it does happen. That's another reason not to have Edmonton high up on this either. Stanley Cup finals, hangover, sure. It is harder to get up for games in October after having those really intense June games. So I don't think there'll be any panic in Florida. Anaheim, I'm not going to put them at the bottom. I think there's some pressure, but not a lot. I think that Anaheim, the fans want to see this team get better, and I agree. I'd like to see the Ducks finally start winning some more games. Maybe going back to that other logo, maybe going back to that Mighty Ducks logo helps. I mean, the logo change shouldn't help, but why not? Sure, why not? So Anaheim goes there. Nashville. There's some pressure on Nashville. However, there's been so many changes. Do people really panic if things don't click right away? I'll put them here. Same spot as Tampa Bay. So conversely, if Nashville gets off to a slow start, and Stamkos does as well. In fact, if both Tampa Bay and Nashville were to get off to rough starts, we'll see articles right away on how if Stamkos had stayed in Tampa, they'd be better off. And Nashville, picking up Stamkos wasn't the right gamble, and they're not playing. That's how we're going to see it. But Nashville, I don't think it'll be like the flat-out panic at the top here with a slow start, but there's definitely pressure on them to win out of the gate. Winnipeg has pressure. Winnipeg coming off of back-to-back losses in the first round, and I mean, they get knocked aside by Vegas in 23. They get knocked aside by Colorado in 24. These are very good teams. So you're not losing to bad teams. I don't think it's the end of the world. But there's some pressure in Winnipeg. This is a team that it feels like may have peaked already, and now it's a matter of can they get themselves into contention for the Stanley Cup? Can they stay near the top of the league in the standings? Columbus. There's pressure in Columbus. I can't have it much higher than that. I can't. Is there panic in Columbus if they have a rough start? I don't know that there is. I don't think fans are going to be casual about it. I don't think Blue Jackets fans are going to be like, well, nah, they're going to be bad again. Oh, well. I think there's some pressure on them to get better, but I think there's an understanding that based on this past season, and the goaltending's probably going to be the same, and the roster's changed somewhat, but none of the dramatic changes. They may need to really fix things, so I don't think there'll be total panic, but I'm not going to put them in the not having any pressure category either. Minnesota, similar. Minnesota's in a similar situation. Minnesota fans, I think, are realistic that the Wild's opportunity to make the playoffs may not be there this year, and it may not be a big deal. Faber signs this big extension today, which kicks in next year. I think the expectation for a lot of Wild fans will be next season when they don't have a severe cap penalty due to the Parisi and Suter buyouts, that we'll see some movement from the Wild, and we might see them back in the playoffs, and who knows, maybe getting into contention for a cup. Vegas, there's going to be some pressure in Vegas. Yep. If they get off to a slow start, you know what? I'll go one better. I'll actually throw it up here. If they get off to a slow start and they're having trouble getting the puck in the other team's net without Marchessault, there's going to be some fans that aren't happy in Vegas. If this team is just not living up to expectations, there will definitely be some fans who have some opinions on that. And so Vegas, I'll put at the top of the board. I think if they get off to a 3-8 start, there'll be a lot of people saying, okay, so is Vegas's opportunity to win a Stanley Cup over? It might be. I honestly, I look at Vegas right now and think to myself, this might be the first season I might be able to make an argument for them missing the playoffs. They've missed the playoffs once, but that year it was due to injuries. This year, I think they could genuinely miss the playoffs just all on their own without any kind of injury issues. Seattle, there's some pressure on Seattle to jump back into the playoffs, but I can't really put them higher than this. I don't feel like for Seattle that people are going to be really upset if they don't make it into the playoffs. They won't be happy. So this area, you're not happy if your team's not playing well to start. But I don't think there's any panic. Which brings us to Utah. Utah's in his first year. Generally, fans don't panic in that first year. You kind of get a grace period. If they were still in Arizona, Arizona would have gone probably here. So not a lot of pressure yet, but the pressure would be getting there. with Utah, that kind of resets. People are just excited to have NHL hockey there, and rightfully so. Let me know your thoughts in the comment section below, as always. Which teams do you think are going to get a long leash if they have a slow start? People aren't going to panic. And which ones do you think, no, people are going to panic if they have a slow start? Let me know your thoughts in the comment section below, as always. Don't forget to hit like and subscribe if you haven't done so already. Thank you guys so much for all your support. I will talk to you again soon.